The music had already started when Garrett Holloway grabbed Reed Hatcher by the arm and spun him away from the lantern light spilling out of the barn doors. Reed's jaw went tight. He could hear the fiddles warming up inside, could hear the laughter and the shuffle of boots on the freshly swept floor, could hear everything he had spent 6 weeks working toward beginning without him. And now Garrett Holloway, with his thick neck and his silver watch chain and his absolute certainty that the world owed him whatever he desired, was standing between Reed and the only reason any of it had ever mattered. "You stay away from her tonight," Garrett said. His voice was low, the kind of low that men like him used when they wanted to remind you they didn't need to shout to make a threat land. "Gloria Darrow came to this ball as my guest. You understand me, Hatcher? She's wearing the brooch I gave her. She'll be on my arm for every dance, and when the night is done, she'll be riding home in my buckboard." Reed looked down at the hand on his arm. He looked at it for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he hasn't quite decided what to do with yet. "Let go of my arm, Garrett. I'm warning you. I know what you've been doing out at the Pendleton place. Did you think nobody would notice a cowhand disappearing into that old widow's barn 3 nights a week? Did you think nobody would figure it out?" Reed felt the bottom of his stomach drop clean out of him. Garrett smiled. It was a horrible, satisfied smile, the smile of a man who has been holding a card face down on the table for weeks and has finally chosen to flip it over. "That's right," Garrett said. "I know about the dancing lessons. I know about every last stumbling, ridiculous step. And if you go in there tonight and make a fool of yourself in front of this entire town in front of her, I will make sure every single person in Calico Flats knows that Reed Hatcher, the quietest, most serious cowhand in the county, spent his Tuesdays and his Thursdays and his Saturday mornings learning to waltz from a 60-year-old widow woman because he was too lovesick to just walk up and say hello to a girl." The fiddles started into a proper tune now. Someone clapped twice in quick succession. Reed pulled his arm free. "You done?" he said. Garrett blinked. That was not the response he had anticipated. "I'm done when I say I'm done." "No," Reed said quietly. "You're done now." And he turned, and he walked toward the light. The story of how Reed Hatcher came to find himself at that exact moment, standing at the threshold of the Calico Flats Harvest Ball with his boots polished and his heart hammering, and 6 weeks of secret lessons tucked away inside him like a held breath, began in the earliest days of September, when the cottonwood leaves were just beginning to think about turning, and the air still carried the last warmth of a long Texas summer. Reed had worked the Dunbar Ranch for 3 years by that point. He was 26 years old, lean and weathered, with hands that had known rope and fence wire and the particular calluses that come from 16-hour days in honest labor. He was not the kind of man people worried about, which meant he was not the kind of man people paid much attention to either. He showed up before anyone else. He worked harder than most. He said what needed to be said and nothing more. And he went back to his bunkhouse at the end of the day and read whatever book he'd borrowed from the lending shelf at the general store. People in Calico Flats called him quiet. They meant it as a simple description, not a complaint. But quiet, Reed had come to understand, had a cost. Quiet meant you could stand 6 feet from a woman for an entire summer, watching her, wanting to speak, and never once managing to close that distance. Gloria Darrow had arrived in Calico Flats in late spring, come out from San Antonio to take the schoolteacher position that had been sitting vacant since old Mr. Perkins retired. She was 24 years old, with dark eyes that moved quickly over everything, the kind of eyes that suggested she was always 2 or 3 thoughts ahead of whatever she appeared to be paying attention to. She had a laugh that she didn't deploy often, but when she did, it had the quality of something genuinely earned rather than performed. She was direct in a way that some people in town found slightly unsettling and Reed found completely extraordinary. He had first spoken to her in July, when her horse had thrown a shoe on the road outside the Dunbar property, and she had walked the animal up to the fence line and called out to ask if anyone knew where the nearest farrier worked. Reed had been the one who answered. He had fixed the shoe himself, right there, because it was faster than sending her 3 miles down the road, and the sun was high and mean, and her water canteen was nearly empty. She had thanked him with genuine warmth, had asked his name, and had looked at him with those quick dark eyes in a way that made him feel, briefly and terrifyingly, like she was reading something in him that he hadn't known was visible. After that, he had found excuses to be in town more often. He told himself it was practical. He told himself he needed things from the store, that he had business at the post office, that the feed supplier required his personal attention on matters that couldn't wait. He told himself a great many things that were not quite true, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. He would see her sometimes, coming out of the schoolhouse at the end of the day, or moving through the dry goods aisles at Mercer's store, or sitting on the bench outside the post office writing letters home. He would lift his hat. She would smile. Occasionally they exchanged a few sentences, always pleasant, always brief, always leaving Reed with the distinct sensation that he had not said any of the things he had intended to say, and had not the faintest idea how to begin saying them. The harvest ball was announced at the beginning of September. It was an annual tradition in Calico Flats, held every October in the Dunbar barn, which was the largest structure in the county, and had played host to the event for 20 years running. There would be music and dancing and tables of food, and everyone for 30 miles around would attend. The dance had a particular reputation as the social event of the year, the occasion at which understandings were reached, courtships were declared, and the long months of solitary winter work were officially put on hold for one evening of collective celebration. Reed heard about it on a Tuesday, standing at the water trough while 2 of the other ranch hands discussed who was likely to ask whom and which family was bringing the best apple cider. He listened with the particular quality of attention he had when something mattered more to him than he wanted to show, and that evening he sat on the edge of his bunk for a long time thinking. The problem was simple and terrible. He couldn't dance. This would not have been remarkable, except for the fact that everyone in Calico Flats danced at the harvest ball. It was the one event in the year where standing against the wall was not a neutral choice but a visible one, where absence was noted and interpreted. And more to the point, more pressingly and devastatingly to the point, he had it fixed in his mind, had it fixed there so completely that removing it would have been like removing a load-bearing wall, that the harvest ball was the moment. It was the occasion. It was the evening when, in the company of music and lantern light, and the particular loosening that came with celebration, he might finally say what he had been failing to say all summer. But if he asked Gloria Darrow to dance, and then stood there moving wrong, stepping wrong, looking wrong, he would not simply embarrass himself. He would embarrass her. He would make her the woman who agreed to dance with the man who couldn't dance, and she was too fine a person for that. He thought about it for 3 nights. He turned it over and examined it from every angle, the way he was accustomed to working through problems, methodically, honestly, without the comfort of self-deception. And on the 4th night he walked out to the Pendleton place. Agnes Pendleton was 62 years old and had been widowed for 8 years. She had come originally from Virginia, where, as she had told anyone who would listen and several people who wouldn't, people understood the importance of proper dancing. Her husband had been a dancing man, she said. She had danced at every significant event of her adult life. When she moved to Texas, she had been appalled by the quality of social dancing she witnessed, and she had, over the years, quietly and without particular advertisement, provided instruction to a handful of young men and women who had come to her before various occasions requiring it. Reed knew about her because a ranch hand named Curtis, who had married a girl from the Miller family 4 years back, had let it slip once that he had gone to Mrs. Pendleton before the wedding. He had said it in the tone of a man confessing a minor crime, with the clear understanding that it would not be repeated. Reed had filed it away with the absolute faithfulness of a man who files things carefully and retrieves them only when necessary. He knocked on Agnes Pendleton's door at 7 in the evening on a Thursday in the first week of September. She answered in her house dress with a lantern in her hand and looked at him with the unhurried assessment of a woman who has been entirely unsurprisable for several decades. "Mr. Hatcher," she said. She knew him as everyone in the county knew everyone, by name and face and general reputation. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said, "I have a favor to ask, and I'm prepared to compensate you fairly for your time and trouble." She studied him for a moment. "Is it about dancing?" She said. He blinked. "It is," he said. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." She was, it turned out, an extraordinary teacher. She had patience that never felt like tolerance, the sort of patience that came from genuine interest rather than mere endurance. She had a battered music box that played 3 waltzes on a tinny, slightly out-of-tune mechanism, and she wound it faithfully at the beginning of every lesson, and sometimes twice in the middle if the tune ran down. Her parlor had a rug she rolled up each time, leaving a broad stretch of clean hardwood floor, and she demonstrated each step with a brisk precision that suggested her body remembered things her years had not diminished. The first lesson was humbling. Reed was accustomed to competence. He was good at the things he did, and he was accustomed to that, not in a prideful way but in the straightforward way of a man who has spent years building genuine skill. To be bad at something was uncomfortable in a way that went beyond mere embarrassment. It felt like being exposed, like having a door opened on a room he hadn't known existed inside him. He kept stepping on her feet. He counted the beats under his breath and lost them. He went right when he should have gone left, forward when the pattern demanded back. Agnes Pendleton said nothing discouraging about any of it. She simply stopped him, repositioned his hand on her waist, made him feel the weight shift before the step, and started again. "You're thinking about your feet," she told him at the end of the first session. "Stop thinking about your feet. Your feet know what to do. Think about the music instead. Think about what the music is saying." "Music doesn't say anything," Reed said. He said it without rudeness, simply as a statement of fact, the way he said most things. Agnes looked at him with a very small smile. "That is precisely your problem," she said. He walked back to the ranch in the dark, 2 miles of open road under a vast Texas sky, and he thought about what she had said. He was not a man given to what he would have called romantic nonsense. He was a man who dealt with physical reality, who measured things by their usefulness and their honesty, who had no particular patience for decoration. But he thought about what Agnes had said, and somewhere on that dark road, with the crickets loud in the grass on either side and the stars overhead so dense, they seemed almost loud themselves. He thought that maybe she was right. He came back 2 days later. He came back the following Tuesday. He came back on the Saturday morning, earlier than she expected him, and she opened the door with a cup of coffee in her hand and nodded at him with the expression of a woman who has correctly predicted something. He got better. It was not fast and it was not effortless, but it was genuine. He stopped counting under his breath. He stopped watching his feet. He started, with some degree of amazement, to hear what the music was doing rather than just tracking when it started and stopped. The waltz had a particular mathematics to it that appealed to something in him, a structure that was also freedom, a pattern that permitted variation. And once he understood that the steps were not a cage but a grammar, the whole thing opened up in a way he hadn't expected. Agnes watched him improve with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsperson watching raw material become something worth using. She increased the difficulty gradually, adding the reverse turn, the change step, the natural and reverse rotations. She made him practice alone, counting aloud, so he could feel the rhythm without the distraction of a partner. She made him practice with her, then alone again, then with her. "You have a good lead," she told him toward the end of the third week. "You don't force the follower, you invite her." "That's unusual. Most men push." Reed considered that for a moment. "Seems rude to push someone," he said. Agnes gave him a real smile then, not just the small professional one she kept ready. "Yes," she said, "it does." During those same weeks, Garrett Holloway was making himself known. Garrett Holloway was 31 years old and owned the largest cattle operation in the county outside of the Dunbar Ranch. He was handsome in a heavy, self-satisfied way, well-dressed by local standards, and possessed of the absolute confidence that comes to men who have never been seriously refused anything they wanted. He had decided, sometime around midsummer, that Gloria Darrow would make an excellent addition to his life, and he had pursued this conclusion with the same methodical acquisition strategy he applied to cattle and land. He brought her flowers twice. He arranged to be at the post office when she collected her mail. He sat in the front pew at church. He had never previously been a front pew man, so he could be first to greet her after the service. He had, at some point in late September, presented her with a small silver brooch in the shape of a leaf, and had done it publicly enough that several people had seen it and drawn conclusions that he had very much wanted them to draw. Gloria accepted the flowers politely and said thank you. She accepted the brooch because refusing it publicly would have been an unpleasant scene, and she was not a woman who manufactured unpleasant scenes unnecessarily. She was not, however, under any confusion about what she felt for Garrett Holloway, which was a moderate and thoroughly unenthusiastic regard. What she felt about Reed Hatcher was considerably less easy to categorize. She had thought about him, off and on, since the afternoon he fixed her horse's shoe. She had noted the quality of his attention, the way he listened, actually listened, rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. She had noticed that when he said something, it was worth hearing. She had found herself, on more occasions than seemed quite reasonable, wondering what he was thinking about when he had that particular expression, the one that looked like concentration but felt, when she happened to catch it, like it was directed at her. She had told herself, reasonably and firmly, that she was imagining things. She was new to this town. She was building a life here, teaching children who needed her attention, earning her place in a community that had not known her long enough to fully trust her. She did not have the luxury of imagining things about quiet cowboys who lifted their hats and fixed horseshoes and said almost nothing. She was failing at this self-correction with impressive consistency. On the second Saturday of September, Gloria walked past the Pendleton place on her afternoon constitutional, taking the long road that went through the quieter part of the county where the dust was thinner and the shade was better. She had no particular reason to go that way. She went that way. She heard music from inside the house. Faint, slightly tinny, the kind of music that came from a wound-up box rather than a real instrument. And beneath it, or alongside it, she heard something that stopped her walking entirely. She heard someone counting. Low, careful, steady. And then the counting stopped, and there was just the music, and through the parlor window, visible through the glass because the curtain had not quite been pulled across. She saw a tall man in a plain work shirt moving across a small parlor floor, moving with a concentration so complete and a care so evident that it arrested her entirely. She recognized him after a moment. The height, the particular line of his shoulders, the way he held his hands. She stood on the road for probably 30 seconds. She could not have said afterward exactly what she felt during those 30 seconds, except that it was something significant and unexpected, something that rearranged itself in her chest in a way that took up more room than it had before. She walked on. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She walked on and said nothing to anyone. But that evening, sitting at her small desk in her rented room at the boarding house, she found that she could not concentrate on the lesson plans she had spread out before her, and she sat for a very long time with her pen dry in her hand and thought about a man trying very hard to do something beautiful. October arrived with a sudden change of temperature, the kind of overnight shift that came to that part of Texas without warning, and the preparations for the harvest ball began in earnest. The women of the Ladies' Auxiliary organized themselves around the question of food and decoration with military efficiency. The Dunbar ranch hands were detailed to sweep and arrange the barn. Tables were borrowed from the church and the schoolhouse. Mr. Dunbar hired a 3-piece string band out of Abilene who came highly recommended and had a reputation for being able to play anything from a reel to a polka to a proper Viennese waltz, which was a point of considerable civic pride. Reed continued his lessons. He was, by the 3rd week of October, dancing well. Not brilliantly, not in the way of a man trained from boyhood, but genuinely well, with a confidence in his body that translated into a kind of quiet assurance in his movement. Agnes watched him cross the parlor floor and made a sound of satisfaction. "You're ready," she said. He stopped. He looked at her. "You think so?" "I know so," she said. "Whether you're ready is a different question." He looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back with the clear-eyed composure of a woman who has been watching young men make themselves nervous about young women for 60 years and finds it both exasperating and entirely worth it. "I'm working on that," he said. "Yes," she said. "I can tell." She poured them both a cup of tea, as she always did at the end of a lesson, and they sat in her parlor on either side of the cold fireplace. Agnes wound the music box one last time and let it play quietly between them. "She saw you," Agnes said. Reed went very still. "I beg your pardon, about a month ago. She walked past on a Saturday and she saw you through the window. I saw her standing out there. Didn't say anything to her, didn't say anything to you, but she saw." Reed processed this for a long, careful moment. "And she didn't say anything," he said. It was not quite a question. "No," Agnes said. "She stood for about half a minute and then she walked on." "What does that mean?" Agnes gave him the kind of look that suggested the answer was obvious but that she was too kind to say so directly. "I think," she said, "that it means she's waiting to see what you do next." Reed set down his teacup. He looked at the window, at the darkness outside, at his own reflection in the glass. "The ball is in 2 weeks," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He walked home in the dark again that night. 2 miles of open road, the October air sharper now, carrying the smell of dried grass and coming cold. He thought about Gloria Darrow standing on the road outside this window, watching him, saying nothing. He thought about what it meant that she hadn't laughed, hadn't told anyone, hadn't let it become a story to tell over supper at the boarding house. He thought about Garrett Holloway, who had been increasingly visible at Gloria's side at church and in town, who had given her a brooch that she wore in public because she was too polite to refuse it, who possessed every advantage that the world recognized and valued, and who would certainly be there at the harvest ball, claiming her company with the effortless aggression of a man who believed possession was 9/10 of the law. Reed had grown up in a world that operated by a particular set of rules, rules he had learned early and followed faithfully. Work hard. Say what you mean. Don't take what isn't yours. Respect the distance between wanting something and having a right to it. These were good rules, mostly, and he had no quarrel with them. But he was beginning to understand that there was a difference between respecting a person's freedom to choose and simply failing to present yourself as a choice. He had spent all summer doing the latter. He had respected the distance so thoroughly that he had never actually given Gloria Darrow the chance to consider it. That was going to change. He found her on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the ball, standing outside the schoolhouse after her students had gone home for the day. She was stacking readers on the bench by the door, making them into a neat pile with the methodical care of a person who likes order and has learned to create it for herself. She looked up when she heard his boots on the board walkway. "Mr. Hatcher," she said. "Miss Darrow," he said. He stopped a few feet from her, hat in hand. He had been running this moment in his head for 3 years, and he had never managed to find the exact right words in his imaginings, and he did not have them now. And he had decided, finally, that waiting for the exact right words was the same as waiting forever. "I was wondering," he said, "if you might already have a commitment for the harvest ball on Saturday." She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was not readable in any simple way. It was the expression of a person processing several things at once. "I don't have a commitment," she said carefully. "Mr. Holloway has suggested I attend with him, but I haven't agreed." "Then I'd like to ask," Reed said, "if you'd come with me." She studied him. It was not an uncomfortable study. It was the kind of attention that felt honest rather than invasive. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." Reed felt something happen in his chest that he had no good word for. It was relief and terror in roughly equal measure, and underneath both of those things was something much simpler and much more dangerous, which was joy. "I'll come for you at the boarding house at 7, he said. "If that suits." "That suits," she said. He nodded, put his hat back on, and walked back down the board walkway. He kept his pace even. He did not permit himself to show anything until he was around the corner and out of her line of sight. And then he stopped walking for just a moment and looked up at the sky, which was very wide and very blue and absolutely indifferent to the fact that everything had just changed. He got word, through the compressed and efficient telegraph of small-town gossip, that Garrett Holloway had heard about the arrangement by Thursday evening and was not pleased. He received this information from Pete Dunbar's youngest son, a 15-year-old named Willie, who possessed the information-gathering instincts of a natural spy, and who delivered it with the serious expression of a person conveying an important military dispatch. Reed thanked him and went back to work. He was in town on Friday to pick up supplies, and Garrett Holloway found him at the hardware store, coming in through the back entrance with the specific purpose of making sure their conversation was not observed. Reed had time to register this, to understand that a man who choreographs his confrontations is a man who is thinking about consequences, and then Garrett was standing in front of him. "I hear you asked Gloria Darrow to the ball," Garrett said. "I did," Reed said. "I'm telling you, as a courtesy, that she'll be attending with me. She told me she hasn't agreed to that." Garrett's expression shifted very slightly. He was the kind of man who kept his face controlled, who had learned that showing too much was a weakness, but there was something that moved under the surface of his composure when his certainty was questioned. "She'll reconsider," he said. "That's her right," Red said. "To reconsider. Same as it's her right not to. I'm a patient man, Hatcher, but I'm not a patient man with you. You work on the Dunbar Ranch. You make a hand's wages and you'll make a hand's wages until you're 60. You don't have anything to offer her." Reed picked up the box of nails he had come for. "You might be right about that," he said. "But that's for her to decide." He walked out, and Garrett let him go, and that night Garrett must have made some inquiries, because by the time he confronted Reed outside the barn on the night of the ball, he knew about the lessons. So Reed walked back toward the lantern light. Inside the barn, the world was warm and golden and loud with celebration. The string band from Abilene was already 3 songs deep, the fiddle leading with the confident authority of a musician who knows his material cold. Tables along the east wall carried pies and cakes and bread, and 3 different kinds of preserved fruit, and a punch bowl that smelled of fresh apple cider with something additional that was probably not cider. Lanterns hung from every beam. The floor was scrubbed pale and smooth. Reed scanned the room immediately, with the specific focused quality of a man who has one priority. He saw her near the center of the barn, standing with Clara Mercer, the storekeeper's wife, who was a sociable woman and had likely attached herself to Gloria early in the evening to make introductions. Gloria was wearing a dark green dress that Reed had never seen before, and the silver brooch was not on it. She had her dark hair up with a few pieces loose at her temples, and she was laughing at something Clara had said, and Reed stood just inside the barn door for a moment before he moved. He was aware, peripherally, that Garrett had come in behind him. He did not look back. Gloria saw him before he reached her. He watched her see him, watched the particular attention shift in her face when she recognized him through the crowd, the small alteration of expression that could have meant anything but that Reed, who had been watching her face for months, understood as the kind of thing that was not nothing. "Mr. Hatcher," she said, when he arrived at the edge of her conversation with Clara. "Miss Darrow," he said. He nodded to Clara, who looked between them with the barely concealed delight of a woman who has just recognized a development. "You look lovely this evening." He had never said anything like that to her before, and he registered, somewhere in his internal accounting system, that it had come out considerably more easily than he had feared. She looked slightly surprised, not unpleasantly, the way people look when they receive something they weren't certain was coming. "Thank you," she said. "You look very well yourself." Clara Mercer found a reason to drift away with the reliability of a person who recognizes her cue. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," Gloria said. It was said with a quality that was not quite casual, that had something careful underneath it, something that was checking for information. "I said I'd come for you at 7, he said. "I knocked at the boarding house. Mrs. Henley said you'd walked ahead." "I did. I wanted to help with the arrangements." A small hesitation. "I thought perhaps I wasn't sure whether the other conversation might have changed things." "What other conversation?" "I saw Mr. Holloway in town yesterday afternoon. He told me he'd spoken to you." She met his eyes directly when she said it, and her eyes were asking something that she wasn't quite asking in words. "He said some things," Reed agreed. "None of them were reasons for me to be somewhere other than here." She looked at him for a moment. The music shifted to a livelier reel, and the floor filled with couples moving quick and cheerful in the steps of a dance that required no particular skill, just willingness and energy. Around them, the evening roared warmly forward. "I should tell you something," Gloria said. Her voice dropped just enough to be for him only. "A few weeks ago I was walking on the Pendleton Road on a Saturday afternoon." Reed was still. "I saw something through the window," she said. "I shouldn't admit that. It wasn't intentional, but I saw." He looked at her, and, he said. His voice was steady. He had gotten his breathing under control sometime in the last 30 seconds. "And I thought," she said carefully, That whoever that was, whatever the reason was, it was one of the most careful and deliberate things I had ever seen anyone do for a purpose they hadn't yet said out loud. The fiddle turned the corner into a new passage, and someone near the punch bowl let out a whoop of general appreciation. "Was I wrong?" she said. "No," Reed said. "You weren't wrong." The music flowed through its bright, quick shape and wound itself down into a break. And the band leader called out something about a waltz, and the crowd on the floor did the universal reorganization that separates the people who are going to dance from the people who aren't. Reed Hatcher looked at Gloria Darrow. "Miss Darrow," he said, "would you dance with me?" She put her hand in his. The thing about all those hours in Agnes Pendleton's parlor, on the worn, clean hardwood floor, with the tinny music box and the patient instruction, and the long evenings of careful practice. The thing Reed had not anticipated, the thing that surprised him entirely when it happened, was that none of it had prepared him for the specific gravity of this. He had learned the steps on the abstract, with a kind, practical older woman who kept the enterprise efficient and professional and focused on technique. He had learned where to put his hands and when to shift his weight and how to feel the beat in his chest rather than count it in his head. All of that was real, and all of that served him. When he put his right hand against Gloria's waist and took her right hand in his left, the steps were there, reliable and ready, the hours of work exactly where he had left them, but none of that had accounted for the fact of her. For the way she settled into the hold with a naturalness that suggested she was a good dancer herself and was already calibrating to his lead. For the way the green dress moved. For the fact that she was looking at him, not at the floor or over his shoulder, but at him, with those quick dark eyes that had been reading things in him for months. And what they were reading now he could not say, but he thought it might be something he didn't need to hide. He led. He led cleanly and without hesitation, the way Agnes had taught him, not pushing, not forcing, but inviting, suggesting, making the path clear without demanding she take it. And Gloria followed with the easy confidence of a woman who trusts the lead, because the lead has earned it, moving with him through the open floor, the long sweeping steps of the waltz carrying them through the space the other couples left. He was aware of watching. He was aware that the room was full of people who knew them both, who were perfectly capable of drawing conclusions, who would talk about this tomorrow and the day after. He didn't care about any of it. He was aware, with the simple completeness of a man who has stopped fighting himself, that he was doing exactly what he should be doing in exactly the right place, with exactly the right person. Garrett Holloway was standing at the edge of the dance floor, a glass of cider in his hand, watching them with an expression that had moved past anger into something colder and more controlled. Reed saw him once, registered him, and returned his attention to where it belonged. "You've been practicing," Gloria said. "For about 6 weeks," he said. "Agnes Pendleton, she's a very good teacher." "I know, I've heard." A pause, the music turned. "When did you decide to do it?" "When the ball was announced," he said. "I knew I'd want to ask you to dance, and I wanted." He considered how to finish that. "I wanted to do it right." She was quiet for a moment. They turned together through a long rotation, and the lantern swung slightly above them, and the warm light moved across her face. "That might be," she said, "the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done in my general direction." "I had a long summer of not saying what I meant," he said. "I was trying to correct that." "What else did you mean? Over the summer, what else didn't you say?" He looked at her. They were still moving, still in the waltz, and the music was doing exactly what Agnes had told him music did. It was saying something, and what it was saying was patient and expansive and entirely on his side. "That I have been paying attention to you since July," he said. that every time I managed to be in the same space as you, I came away thinking about what you said for days afterward. That I think you're extraordinary, and I have thought so from the first 5 minutes, and that I have been a considerable fool about saying so, and I intend to stop being a fool about it." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, and then she smiled, and it was the genuine, earned smile, the real one, the one he had seen her give to things that actually deserved it. "Stop being a fool about it," she said softly. "Yes, I think that would be very good." The waltz ended. The band leader called a brief pause while they tuned. Around them, the floor broke into conversation and movement, and the general warm noise of a community enjoying itself. Reed and Gloria stood in the middle of it with their hands still loosely joined, slightly apart but not entirely, in the way of two people who have just crossed a line and are standing on the new side of it, taking stock. It was then that Garrett came. He didn't make a scene. He was too careful for that, too conscious of his position in this community, too aware that witnesses would remember. He came and stood beside Gloria with a proprietary ease and said, "Lovely dancing," in a tone that managed to be simultaneously complimentary and dismissive. Gloria looked at him with the calm directness that Reed had come to think of as one of her particular gifts. "Thank you, Garrett," she said. "I was hoping for a dance myself," Garrett said. "I did drive out from town to see you this evening." "You drove out to the harvest ball," Gloria said. "Like everyone else. I was hoping we might have a chance to speak. There was something I wanted to discuss." "I think," Gloria said, with a pleasant finality that left no actual room for argument, "that tonight is probably not the right occasion for a serious discussion. But if you have something to say, you're welcome to come by the schoolhouse on Monday during the lunch hour." Garrett held her gaze for a moment. He looked at Reed. Reed looked back at him without hostility, and without any particular expression at all, the way you look at something you have already accounted for and found untroubling. Garrett Holloway left before the end of the evening. He did it without drama, collecting his coat and walking out while the band was in the middle of a fast reel, and Reed watched him go with the steady recognition of a man who knows that some problems don't disappear so much as change shape, but who also knows that tonight is not the night to worry about it. The rest of the evening was the best evening of Reed Hatcher's life. He danced with Gloria twice more. He brought her cider, and they stood together near the east wall, talking with an ease that had not been present in their earlier conversations, the ease of people who have finally told the truth and found it survivable. She told him about San Antonio, about growing up in a family of women who worked, about her mother who had taught her to read before she was 4, and who had made her understand that intelligence was not a liability. He told her about growing up in the Panhandle, about his father who had been a farrier and his mother who had been a schoolteacher herself, and had died of fever when he was 12, about the 3 years in Calico Flats that had been the first place in his adult life that had felt like a place he might actually want to stay. "Is that why?" she asked. "That your mother was a teacher?" He thought about that honestly. "Maybe part of it," he said. "But the main part was that when you looked at me, you were actually looking." She was quiet for a moment, and then she put her hand on his forearm just for a moment, just the briefest acknowledgement, and said, "I was. I am." They were among the last to leave. Agnes Pendleton, who had come to the ball as she came every year, found Reed near the door while Gloria was saying goodbye to Clara Mercer and pressed his arm briefly with one small hand. "Well done," she said. "I had a good teacher," he said. Agnes smiled her real smile and went out into the October night. Outside, under the enormous Texas sky with its freight of stars, Reed helped Gloria into her coat and they walked together back toward town, 2 miles of road with the dried grass rustling on either side, and the cold, clean air carrying the last warmth of the lanterns behind them. She took his arm. He let her. They walked without talking for a while, and it was the kind of silence that is not empty. "What happens Monday?" he said eventually, "when Holloway comes to the schoolhouse?" "Nothing happens," she said. "I'll tell him plainly what I've been trying to tell him for 2 months without being plain enough, that I appreciate his attention, but I am not interested in his courtship. He won't like it." "No," she said. "But that's not actually my responsibility, his feelings about hearing no." Reed considered that. "You're very sure of yourself," he said. He meant it as a compliment and delivered it that way. "I've had to be," she said. "A woman who teaches school in a place where she came knowing no one has to know her own mind. It's not a luxury, it's a requirement." "I think it's admirable." She looked up at him as they walked. The road was pale under the starlight. "What are you?" she asked. "I mean, what do you want? Not from tonight specifically, from your life." It was a direct question, a real question, the kind of question that assumes a seriousness of purpose behind it. He was not surprised that she asked it. He was glad. "I want land," he said. "I've been saving. Not enough yet, but I'm close to enough to start thinking seriously about a small operation. Beef, maybe, or horses. I know horses better than cattle, honestly. He paused. I'd like a life that I built, not one I was handed, my own." "How long until the land?" "Another year, maybe." "Maybe 18 months, she nodded slowly. "That's a real thing," she said. "That's not a dream." "No," he said. "It's a plan." They reached the edge of town where the road became the main street and the boarding house was 2 buildings down. They stopped at the corner. The street was quiet, the ball crowd all dispersed or heading home in other directions. "Reed," she said. It was the first time she had used his name, just his name alone, and it hit him somewhere behind his sternum with a very specific force. "Gloria," he said. "Ask me to dinner Sunday," she said. "If you intend to." He looked at her for a moment in the starlight with the whole of it. The summer, the wasted months, the lessons in the old widow's parlor, the waltz, all of it, compressed into this single moment on a quiet street corner in October. "Will you have dinner with me Sunday?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I will." She went inside. He walked home under the stars. Monday came, and with it the kind of cold clarity that follows a significant change. Reed was at work before dawn as usual, mending fence line in the far pasture with 2 other hands. And when the noon hour came, he was aware, with a low and steady attention that he made no effort to dismiss, that Gloria was across town in the schoolhouse talking to Garrett Holloway. He did not go to the schoolhouse. That was her territory and her conversation and her right to handle as she chose. He ate his lunch, sitting on the rail fence with his back to the wind, and trusted her. He learned later, from Gloria herself, that the conversation had been brief and unpleasant in exactly the way she had expected it to be. Garrett had said things about Reed that were designed to wound, about prospects and standing, and the difference between a ranch hand and a man of substance. Gloria had listened to all of it with the complete attention of a woman who is deciding how she wants to respond, and then had said, very calmly, that she was not interested in a courtship from him, and that she wished him well. He had left angry. He had said, on his way out, something about how she'd understand eventually what a mistake this was, the kind of parting shot that was meant to sting, but landed instead as confirmation that she had made exactly the right decision. She told Reed about it over dinner Sunday. They were at the hotel restaurant, which was the most respectable public eating establishment in Calico Flats, and had the virtue of tablecloths and proper glassware. She told it matter-of-factly, without drama, with the slight humor of someone who has dealt with a disagreeable task and is glad to have it behind her. "Were you nervous?" Reed asked. "A little," she said. "Not about what to say, about how he'd take it." "He'll make it difficult," Reed said. "Men like that generally do when they are refused." "Are you worried?" "I'm careful," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him across the table. "Is there something specific you're worried about?" "He knows about the dancing lessons," Reed said. He had been going to tell her eventually, and this seemed like the right moment. She was still. "He said it outside the barn on Saturday, before the ball started," Reed said. "He was going to use it to embarrass me. I think he thought that threatening to make it public would, I don't know, change something." Gloria thought about that for a moment. "What did you do?" she said. "Walked away from him and went inside." She looked at him with an expression that was partly amused and partly something else, something warmer. "He thought it would embarrass you," she said slowly. "He thought you'd be ashamed." "I think he expected me to be," Reed said. "Are you?" He considered the question with the honesty he gave to all questions. "No," he said. "I decided to do a thing I didn't know how to do because there was something I wanted more than I wanted my dignity. That doesn't seem shameful to me." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before, a softness that was different from her usual directness, not replacing it but running alongside it. "It's the least shameful thing I've ever heard," she said. After that dinner, things moved with the particular certainty of two people who have been cautious for a long time and have decided, together, to stop. They had dinner the following Sunday and the one after that. He called at the schoolhouse once a week, and she showed him what she was teaching, the readers and the arithmetic and the maps she'd had sent from a bookseller in Austin. He told her about horses, about the specific intelligence of horses, about what it was like to work with an animal that could read your mood before you'd finished having it. They argued once about something so small that he couldn't remember afterward what it had been about. And the arguing was clarifying rather than damaging, the kind of argument that establishes that two people are honest with each other rather than simply agreeable. He found the land in late November. It was a 40-acre parcel 3 miles east of town, in the direction of the Pendleton place as it happened, with a small creek running through the lower quarter and a farmhouse on it that needed serious work but was structurally sound. The previous owner had moved his family to California and left the property with the county, and the asking price was, by careful management of everything Reed had saved in 3 years of work, just barely achievable. He told Gloria about it on a Sunday in December, on the road outside town, walking in the cold, clear afternoon with their breath making small clouds. She listened to the whole description, the acreage, the creek, the farmhouse, the price, the plan for horses, and then she said, "Can I see it?" He brought her out the following afternoon, after her school day was done, in the ranch's wagon. They walked the property in the winter light, moving through the frozen grass down to the creek and back up along the fence line. She asked questions that were practical and direct, the questions of someone who was constructing a picture rather than being politely interested, questions about water access and soil quality and the distance to the main road. At the corner of the property where the fence met the creek, she stopped and looked at the farmhouse. "That window on the second floor faces east," she said. "The morning light would come in there first." "I hadn't noticed that," he said. "I noticed it," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the house with an expression that was specific and interior and careful, and he understood it, understood what she was doing, and he stood beside her for a long moment watching her look at it. "Gloria," he said. She turned. "I know it's soon," he said. "And I know I should be more formal about this, and I'm probably doing this in the wrong order or without enough of a speech. But I think you know what I'm going to say, and I think you already know your answer. and I would rather ask plainly than make either of us wait longer for what I think we both already understand." She was looking at him with those quick dark eyes, and they were very steady and very warm. "Then ask plainly," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. The winter wind moved through the dried grass beside the creek. Above them, the sky was the color of old pewter, high and cold and indifferent, and the light on the east-facing window of the farmhouse was the last light of the afternoon. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you, Reed Hatcher." He kissed her for the first time, there at the corner of their property, in the cold December air. It was not a complicated kiss. It was the kind of kiss that is an arrival rather than a departure, a punctuation rather than an opening, the physical completion of something that had been building since July, and a horse with a thrown shoe, and a man who showed up with a kit and a patient pair of hands. Garrett Holloway did, in fact, make things difficult. He made things difficult in the specific way that men with resources and wounded pride tend to make things difficult, which was quietly and through legitimate channels, and with a persistent attention that was more exhausting than any open confrontation. He had, it emerged, gotten to the county land office before Reed and put in an inquiry on the same 40 acres, not because he wanted the land, but because he had learned that Reed wanted it, and he had the money to complicate the purchase. He had not gone so far as to make a formal offer that would have been noticed and commented on, but he had asked for a delay on the sale, citing some procedural question about the title, and the land clerk, who owed Garrett a favor from a year back, had obliged. Reed found out about the delay on a Wednesday. He found out about Garrett's role in it on a Thursday, from the land clerk himself, who had a conscience that the favor had been sitting uneasily on, and who told Reed the truth when asked directly. Reed sat with it for a day. He didn't tell Gloria immediately, not because he was hiding it from her, but because he wanted to understand the shape of the problem before he brought it to someone whose judgment he valued, and whose attention he didn't want to consume with a problem he might be able to solve. On Friday morning, he went to see Garrett Holloway. He went to the cattle operation, where Garrett kept an office in a building behind the main barn, and he knocked on the door and was let in by a ranch hand who knew him from town. Garrett was at his desk with ledgers, and he looked up with the expression of a man who is not quite surprised. "Hatcher," he said. "Holloway," Reed said. He took off his hat. "I'm not here for a fight. I want to have a conversation." "Sit down, then." Reed sat. "I know you've put a hold on the Perkins parcel." Garrett didn't bother denying it. "I had a question about the title," he said. "That question is going to answer itself in your favor," Reed said. "And then there's going to be another question, and then another one. And this is going to go on for as long as you're willing to spend money on it. I understand that. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong about what you can do." Garrett leaned back. "Then what are you here for?" "I'm here to ask you to stop," Reed said. "Not because I can make you. You and I both know you've got resources I haven't. I'm asking because this has nothing to do with the land, and you know it. Maybe I've developed an interest in that parcel." "You haven't," Reed said. "You have no use for 40 acres with a bad fence and a farmhouse that needs a new roof. You're doing this because she chose different than you wanted her to." A long silence. Garrett's face was doing the thing it did when he was deciding how much to reveal. "She'll regret it," Garrett said. It was said with less heat than Reed had expected. It was said with the quality almost of a man who is repeating something he has told himself and is not entirely sure he believes anymore. "That's possible," Reed said honestly. "Anything is possible, but that's for time to say, not for either of us." Another silence. "You went to Agnes Pendleton," Garrett said. His voice was different now, less tactical. "For 6 weeks you went out there to learn to dance, just to dance with her at the ball." "Yes," Reed said. "That's a ridiculous thing to do. I know, Reed said. Garrett looked at him for a long moment, and something moved across his face that was not anger and was not contempt, and was something considerably more complicated than either. It might have been recognition. It might have been the very unwilling acknowledgement of a man who had spent money and leverage and strategy to acquire what another man had simply decided to try to deserve. Release the hold, Reed said. Let the sale go through. That's all I'm asking. He waited. Garrett looked down at his ledgers. Get out of my office, Hatcher, he said. But his voice was tired rather than angry. Reed stood, put his hat on, and left. The hold was released the following Monday. He told Gloria about it that evening, all of it, the delay and Garrett's role and the conversation in the office. She listened with the focused stillness of a person who is processing something important, and when he was done, she was quiet for a moment. You went to talk to him alone, she said. I did. You should have told me first. Yes, he said. I should have. That was wrong of me. It was your business too. She looked at him. Don't do that again, she said. Don't manage things that concern us both by yourself. We decide things together. Yes, he said, we do. She held his gaze for a moment to be sure, and then she nodded, and it was done. They were married in February, at the small church in Calico Flats, on a day that was cold but clear, with a thin winter sun making long gold angles across the pews. Agnes Pendleton sat in the third row and cried with an elegant efficiency, blotting her eyes with a pressed handkerchief, and composing herself with the practiced calm of a woman who considers crying at weddings entirely appropriate and over-emoting about it entirely unnecessary. Gloria wore a cream dress her mother had sent from San Antonio, fitted at the waist with small pearl buttons all the way up the back, and her hair was up the same way it had been at the harvest ball. Reed stood at the front of the church in his good suit and watched her come down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Dunbar, who had offered since there was no family closer, and he thought, all right, here it is. This is the place I was going, the land sale completed in March. They spent the spring working on the farmhouse. Reed and whoever he could recruit from the ranch on days off, patching the roof and reinforcing the floors and repairing the fence line. Gloria painted the kitchen walls a pale yellow that she said would make the winter mornings better, and Reed found. On the first morning, he saw the sun come in off that eastern window and fall on those yellow walls, that she had been entirely right. He started the horse operation that summer. It was small at first, 3 breeding mares and a stallion acquired from a reputable stock operation outside Abilene. And the work was enormous, and the income was modest, and the margins were narrow. But he knew horses, and he knew the work, and he built it honestly, and by the following spring he had sold his first foal for a price that made the books balance in a new and encouraging way. Gloria taught. She taught through the first year of their marriage with the same dedication and directness that had characterized everything she did. And she was good at it in the way that people are good at things they were genuinely made for. She had 30 students by the second year, ranging from 6 to 14, and she had fought the school board, politely but immovably, for better materials, and had won every argument she had chosen to engage in. In the late autumn of their first year together, she told him she was expecting. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the account books when she told him, and he put down the pen and looked at her with an expression that she told him later was not at all what she had expected, which was surprise or joy or some combination of the two. What he looked, she said, was simply and completely certain, like a man who has been waiting for a thing to happen that he always knew would happen, and it has happened, and he looks exactly like himself. Their son was born in July of 1882. They named him Thomas, after Reed's father's father, and he arrived in the world with the fierce and impatient energy of a person who has places to be. He was a solid, healthy baby who slept adequately and cried with a purposefulness that suggested he had specific objections rather than general discontent. And from the first weeks of his life, he was interested in everything with a quality of attention that both his parents recognized with great and slightly apprehensive affection. Reed held him on the porch the first evening, in the long summer dusk, with Gloria in the chair beside him and the horses moving peacefully in the near pasture, and said nothing for a long time. "What are you thinking?" Gloria asked. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "about how many things had to go exactly the way they went to get here. The horseshoe, the ball, Agnes Pendleton's music box." He looked down at Thomas, who was looking back at him with the wide and absolute attention of the very new. "If any one of those things went different." "They didn't," she said. "No," he said, "they didn't." Agnes Pendleton came to visit in August and held Thomas for a very long time and told him, in a perfectly serious tone, that she would teach him to dance when he was old enough, and that he would have better instruction than his father, who had been an excellent but late-starting student. Reed, who was standing in the kitchen doorway listening, said, "That seems reasonable," and Gloria laughed, and the laugh went out into the warm summer air and scattered. The horse operation grew. By 1883, Reed had expanded the herd and had a small but steady clientele among the ranches of the county for working stock and saddle horses. He had a particular reputation for the quality of his training. People said his horses were responsive without being nervous, which was the specific quality that distinguished a well-trained animal from a merely broken one. He hired a man in the autumn of that year, a quiet, careful individual named Sam Breck, who had come out of Missouri and knew horses from the bone up. And the operation became something that required genuine management rather than simple oversight. Gloria, in the spring of 1884, told him she was expecting again. Their second child was a daughter born in November of that year, and they named her Margaret for Gloria's mother. She arrived in the world with a stillness that her brother had never possessed, a quality of observing that was very like her father's and made her parents look at each other over her head in the first weeks, with the specific recognition of people seeing themselves reflected in a new and slightly humbling context. Thomas, by this point 2 years old and operating at full capacity, was fascinated by his sister with a passionate and proprietary interest that required careful management. He needed to be in her general vicinity at all times and felt personally responsible for her continued well-being, which expressed itself in a variety of ways that were endearing and occasionally disruptive. Calico Flats changed gradually through these years, as the towns of the West changed in the 1880s, with the coming of the telegraph line and the expansion of the railroad spur, and the arrival of people who had not been there at the beginning and who brought new energies, and sometimes new complications. The schoolhouse was expanded in 1883, a full second room added, and Gloria was given an assistant teacher, a young woman from Waco who was capable and kind, and who admired Gloria with a transparent sincerity that Gloria found both gratifying and slightly embarrassing. Garrett Holloway left Calico Flats in the autumn of 1883. He sold his cattle operation to a consortium from Dallas and moved north. Some people said to Kansas, others to Colorado, and what became of him after that was not something anyone in Calico Flats followed closely. Reed heard the news from Willie Dunbar, who was 17 by then and still the county's most reliable information source, and received it with a simple nod and no particular commentary. Agnes Pendleton celebrated her 65th birthday in the spring of 1884 with a dinner at the hotel restaurant to which she invited, in addition to Reid and Gloria, the 5 other people in the county she had taught to dance over the years. It was a cheerful and somewhat sentimental evening, and at one point Agnes stood and said, without a great deal of ceremony, that she had been thinking about moving back to Virginia where her sister's family was, and that she wanted everyone to know that teaching Reed Hatcher to waltz had been among the most satisfying things she had done in her years in Texas. Reed, who was sitting beside Gloria and whose hand she was holding under the table, said, "I hope you know I'm going to come to Virginia to visit." Agnes said, "I am counting on it." She moved east in June. The Pendleton place was bought by a family from Louisiana, the Treadwells, who had 4 children and a cart full of furniture, and who were greeted on their first Sunday in town with a covered dish from Gloria, and an offer from Reed to look at their horses if they had any concerns. The second harvest ball, the one that fell in October of 1884, was attended by the Hatcher family. Thomas was too young for the dancing, but was awake past his usual bedtime and deeply interested in the music, sitting on Reed's arm and tracking the fiddle with his whole small body in a way that made Agnes, who had not yet left for Virginia and had come to the ball as she always did, observe from the opposite side of the floor that there was clearly a natural musician in the next generation, and that it was probably not coming from Reed. Reed danced with Gloria. He danced with her the way he had danced with her the first time. The waltz from Agnes's music box turned into the waltz from the Abilene fiddle player, and she moved with him the way she always had, with the easy confidence and the trust and the specific gravity of a person who has chosen where they are entirely on purpose. She put her face close to his ear at one point in the middle of the floor and said, "Do you know what I thought when I saw you through that window?" "What?" he said. "I thought, that man is trying very hard to be something, and then I thought, I wonder what it is." "Now you know," he said. "I knew before long," she said. "I knew at the corner of the fence. The farmhouse window." "The farmhouse window," she confirmed, "east-facing." They turned together through the warm lantern light, the music doing what music does, and around them, the community they had built their life inside swirled and laughed and moved and was alive. In 1885, the horse operation made its first genuinely strong profit, enough for Reed to improve the barn substantially, and purchase 2 additional mares from a quality breeder in San Antonio that he'd been corresponding with for a year. Sam Breck proved himself invaluable through that year's foaling season, which was demanding, and Reed gave him a partnership stake in October that Sam accepted with a handshake and a serious nod and an obvious inability to say what he felt about it that Reed recognized completely. Thomas started school the autumn of 1886. In the schoolhouse his mother ran, which created a complicated domestic dynamic that all 3 of them had to negotiate carefully. Gloria maintained a scrupulous professional neutrality about her son's education that impressed Reid and slightly confounded Thomas, who had expected some advantage and received none. He was an intelligent child and adjusted quickly. By midwinter, he was reading ahead of his classmates and developing a specific interest in arithmetic that Gloria privately found extremely gratifying. Margaret, 2 years old, had by this time become a person of considerable personal force. She had her mother's directness and her father's quiet, a combination that expressed itself as a person who said almost nothing and then, when she did speak, said exactly the thing. She was interested in horses with the specific and practical interest of someone who sees immediately what a thing is for, and she followed Reed around the barn and pasture with a focused attention that, Sam Breck said, was going to make her a first-rate horsewoman by the time she was 10. In the spring of 1887, Gloria discovered she was expecting a third time. She told Reed in the kitchen over morning coffee with the matter-of-fact directness that characterized all the important things she said to him. He put down his cup. "Good morning," he said. She laughed. The real laugh, the earned one. Their third child, a second son born in December of that year, was named Daniel, for no particular family reason, but because they both liked the name, and because there was a straightforwardness to it that seemed to suit whoever he was going to be. He arrived in the world in the particular way of third children, without excessive drama, as though he had assessed the situation from the available information, and decided it was manageable. By the time Daniel was born, the farmhouse had been expanded. Reed had added a second full bedroom in the east wing the summer of 1886, anticipating, with the practical foresight that characterized his planning in all things. The yellow kitchen had been repainted once, a slightly deeper yellow that Gloria said was more honest, and the east window still caught the morning light. They had supper together every evening, the 5 of them at the kitchen table. 5 when Sam Breck joined them, which was most evenings because he boarded in the smaller outbuilding, and Reed had a long time ago stopped pretending that the invitation was optional. Gloria cooked with the same directness she applied to everything, unfussy and good, and Reed washed up afterward because he had proposed this division early in their marriage as a simple matter of fairness, and had never reconsidered it. Some evenings, after supper, when the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Reed would wind the old music box that Agnes had left for them, packed in the trunk of useful things she'd sent before her departure. It played the same 3 waltzes it had always played, slightly more tinny now, slightly slower in the mechanism. He would wind it and it would play, and sometimes Gloria would cross the room and put her hand in his, and they would turn together in the kitchen in the yellow room under the evening lamplight. It was a small thing. It was one of the great things. They were the same thing. Agnes Pendleton wrote from Virginia twice a year, letters full of her particular voice, telling them about her sister's family and the Virginia weather and the dancing at various events she attended. She reported, in a letter in 1886, that she had begun teaching the neighbors' grandchildren, and that they were better raw material than some she could name. Read this passage aloud to Gloria, and they both understood who was being referenced and were both very fond of it. In 1888, a letter arrived from Agnes that was different from the others. It was shorter, and the hand was slightly less precise, and it said that her health had been indifferent through the winter, and that she was being well looked after, and that she had been thinking, as one does, about the things worth thinking about. She said that of all the things she had done in her life, the dancing she had given people remained among the ones she was most at peace with. She said, "Tell the children I expect them to learn properly." Reed wrote back that same evening, 4 pages, which was the longest letter he had ever written to anyone. He told her about the horses, and about Thomas's mathematics, and about Margaret's affinity for the barn, and about Daniel, who at 8 months was already demonstrating a preference for being upright, and in motion that suggested he would be walking early. He told her about the music box and the kitchen and the evenings. He told her, at the end, that she had given them more than she knew, and that the dancing was the least of it. Agnes died in March of 1889. Her sister's family wrote to inform them. She had been, they said, completely herself until nearly the end, and had spent a pleasant evening dancing with her grandniece the week before, and had gone quietly in the night. Reed received the letter on a Tuesday. In the spring morning, with the pasture green and the mares in good condition and the whole world operating in its usual indifferent continuity. He read it twice, standing at the fence. That evening he told Gloria, and she cried with the honest, uncomplicated grief of someone who knew that the right response to the death of a good person was to cry. And Reed sat beside her at the kitchen table and held her hand, and let it be what it was. Thomas, who was 7 and possessed of an increasing awareness of the world, asked at supper what had happened. Reed told him, plainly, that the woman who had taught him to dance had died, and that she was someone very good who had done something very kind, and that part of the way you honored people like that was by remembering them. Thomas thought about this with the seriousness he brought to most things. "Will you teach me," he said, "to dance what she taught you?" Reed looked at his son. He looked across the table at Gloria. "Yes," he said, "I'll teach you." In October of 1889, the Hatcher family attended the Harvest Ball. Thomas was 9, Margaret was 7, Daniel was nearly 2. It was the first year they had brought all 3 children, and the barn was warm and loud and gold-lit in the way it had always been. Thomas danced with his mother, carefully and incorrectly, with the concentration of a child determined not to fail at something. Margaret sat on the bench by the east wall and watched the dancers with her father's quality of attention, measuring everything. Daniel slept against Reed's shoulder for the first part of the evening with the monumental indifference of the very young toward social occasions. When the first waltz started, Gloria appeared at Reed's side and he transferred Daniel to the bench beside Margaret, who accepted her brother's weight with the resigned competence of a middle child who has been through this procedure before. Reed and Gloria moved onto the floor. They danced in the same barn where they had first danced, under the same kind of lanterns, to a fiddle player who was not the same musician, but played the same waltz that had been played every October in this barn for over 20 years. They knew each other's weight and rhythm and habit now with the completeness that comes from years rather than evenings. Knew the particular way each other moved when tired versus when happy versus when thinking. Knew the small corrections and the familiar comforts of a hold that had not changed because nothing about it needed to. Around them, the town danced, and the October dark pressed against the barn walls, and inside was all the warmth and noise of a living community going about its living. Reed turned Gloria through a long rotation, and she looked at him over his shoulder and then back at his face, and her expression was the one he had been watching for years, and would go on watching and never tire of, the one that was direct and warm and had been given to him on purpose. He thought of a Thursday in September 6 years past. He thought of a music box winding down and starting again. He thought of counting steps in a small parlor with a patient woman who told him to stop thinking about his feet and listen to the music instead. He thought about what music says and what it had said all along and what he had finally heard. He held his wife and danced. Their life continued with the forward momentum of a life being genuinely lived, messy and various and full of the ordinary complications and the extraordinary ordinary pleasures. The horse operation prospered and expanded. Gloria taught until 1892, when the school board hired a second full teacher, and she took a reduced role that she could balance with the increasing demands of 3 children who were each, in their distinct ways, a great deal to manage. She did not stop entirely. She was not the kind of woman who stopped things entirely. Thomas grew tall and mathematical and developed his mother's directness and his father's habit of watching before acting. By 14, he was already useful in the horse operation, with a facility for the business side that Reed had not anticipated and was quietly delighted by. Margaret became exactly the horsewoman Sam Breck had predicted, with a particular gift for reading the disposition of an animal that Reed thought was better than his own, and did not hesitate to say so. Daniel grew into a person of great good nature and inexhaustible energy, interested in everything with an indiscriminate enthusiasm that made him exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sam Breck became, over the years, what he had always practically been: family. He was there for all the important occasions, quiet and steady, and the children called him Sam, and knew his opinion was worth having, and that he kept their father's confidences, and could be trusted with their own. He was the kind of man whose presence you understand the value of slowly and completely, and he was part of the Hatcher household in the only way that mattered, which was in the day-to-day reality of it. In 1895, Thomas turned 13, and Reed began teaching him to waltz in the kitchen on Friday evenings, winding the old music box that was now extremely slow and somewhat uncertain in its mechanism, but still managed to produce recognizable music if you were patient with it. Thomas approached this instruction with the mixture of reluctant participation and genuine competitiveness that characterized everything he did, and within a month was executing the basic patterns with a correctness that was mechanically precise, if somewhat lacking in feeling. Gloria watched one Friday evening from the kitchen doorway and said, at the conclusion of the lesson, "He's very correct." "I know," Reed said. Agnes would have said he was thinking about his feet. Reed looked at his son. "You're thinking about your feet," he said. Thomas looked indignant. "I'm thinking about the steps," he said, "which are the same thing." "They're not," Gloria said from the doorway. "Come dance with me and I'll show you why." It was, in its way, the same lesson Agnes had given Reed in a small parlor a dozen years earlier, passed on in a kitchen by lantern light, going forward into another generation. The music was what it had always been. The point was what it had always been. On a Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1896, Reed and Gloria walked the fence line of their property together, as they sometimes did, the way two people with a shared investment in a piece of land walk its edges now and then to remember what they have. The creek was running well, fed by a good winter's rain. The mares were in the far pasture, moving in that casual, purposeful way that horses move when nothing is required of them. The farmhouse behind them had the settled look of a structure that has been lived in with care and intention. At the corner where the fence met the creek, that same corner where Reed had asked a question one cold December afternoon 14 years ago, Gloria stopped and looked back at the house. The east window caught the afternoon light. From this angle it had a particular quality of warm gold, the same quality that the morning light had, reproduced in the afternoon by some trick of angle and glass. "I was right about the window," she said. "You were right about the window," he said. "I'm usually right," she said, with the tone of someone who is mostly joking and partly not. "I know," he said. "It's one of the things I counted on." She looked at him. "You counted on it?" "When I was deciding whether to trust my judgment," he said. "I thought she has good judgment. If she's willing, that's data. That's information I can rely on." She laughed, the real laugh, the earned one, the same laugh it had always been. "That is the most unromantic and entirely accurate description of a marriage proposal I have ever heard," she said. "I think it's romantic," he said. "Tell me how it's romantic." "Because it means I think you're smarter than me," he said. "And I'm not wrong. That's very romantic." She shook her head, still laughing, and he took her hand and they walked back along the fence line in the spring afternoon. The horses moved in the far pasture. The creek ran. The house with its east window stood in the long light of the afternoon, exactly where it had always been, exactly what they had made it. Inside, the music box sat on the kitchen shelf, silent now, finally stopped for good, The mechanism finally wound down past repair. But it had done its work. It had said what music says, the thing that Reed Hatcher had stood in a small parlor and learned to hear. That pattern is also freedom, that structure permits joy, that the most precise and deliberate things done for love are not less beautiful for their precision but more, and that some steps practiced alone in secret become, in the right hands in the right moment, the thing they were always meant to be. The beginning,